Once filled with the echoes of laughter and life, the house stood at the brink of a vast forest, an isolated estate. It was now a place of terrible silence, hiding secrets that would shortly be revealed in the most terrible manner. Renowned forensic entomologist Leona Habib had been called to examine a horrific scene at this very estate, one that would haunt her for the rest of her days. Leona had developed her profession by researching insect life cycles and their part in body breakdown. Though respected among her colleagues, this was a niche area that the general public sometimes misinterpreted. Still, this case was unlike anything she had ever seen. One evening, the call arrived late. 2 bodies had been discovered, violently killed, left to decay in the basement of the estate. Marie Moretti and her new husband, Carl Gustafsson, were the identified victims. While Carl was an upcoming architect, Marie had been a successful corporate attorney. Just a year ago, they had married and combined dreams and family into a fresh life shared. But that dream now resembled a nightmare. Friends, sorry to interrupt, but please help me reach 1,500 subscribers by the end of the summer. I will be very pleased. Let's keep going. A group of cadaver dogs made the bodies found possible. As they were on a regular training session in the adjacent forest, these especially trained dogs smelled decay. Their handlers had called the authorities right away, and shortly the mansion was teeming with police and forensic investigators. The next morning, Leona showed up at the scene. The stench of death permeated the air, and what she saw was absolutely horrible. The basement was barely lit, just enough to highlight the hideous condition of the bodies. Marie and Carl had been dead for at least 2 weeks, their bodies in advanced stages of breakdown. Insects had already started their work. Thus, without a careful inspection, it is difficult to find the precise cause of death. Leona felt as she started her investigation that there was more to this case than first seemed clear-cut. The body's posture and the absence of defensive wounds all suggested something more sinister. Knowing that the insects would offer a chronology of death that might be vital for case closure, she painstakingly gathered samples. The cops were already buried in their research. Leading the team was seasoned investigator Detective Lucas Ramirez, known for cracking even the most difficult problems. Although he had seen plenty of horrific crimes, this one particularly bothered him because of a personal component. Several weeks before the bodies were discovered, Marie Moretti's son, Alexei Moretti, had vanished under reported notice. Alexei was a disturbed young man with a bad relationship with his mother and rebellious attitude. Friends and acquaintances said he was smart but erratic, a ticking time bomb just ready to blow. Originally handled as a runaway case, his disappearance's treatment changed drastically once the bodies were found. Working closely, Leona and Detective Ramirez assembled the jigsaw. Marie had wed Carl soon after divorcing Alexei's father, Dmitry Moretti, according they discovered. Alexei had been caught in the middle of a stormy family dynamic after the acrimony of the divorce. Marie had been given custody, but over time, Alexei's relationship with her had gotten worse. Alexei felt even more alienated when Marie married Carl, which caused regular conflicts and outbursts. Leona looked at Marie's phone, and one especially troubling bit of evidence surfaced. Deeply buried among her erased messages was a conversation with a close friend expressing life's existential anxiety. Marie had said Alexei had grown more hostile, threatening to kill her and Carl should they not leave him alone. Sent just days before her death, this letter presented a terrifying picture of a family on verge of collapse. Leona's research showing the bodies had been relocated post-mortem turned the inquiry into a darker direction. According to the insect's life cycles, the basement was not where death first occurred. This implied that the killer added premeditation to the crime by carefully organizing and carrying out the body disposal, so implying time. Suspicion of Alexei naturally emerged as the puzzle's bits came together. His sudden disappearance, threats he had made, and past violent behavior all pointed to him as the main suspect. Still, lots of unresolved issues remained. Why had he taken his mother's and stepfather's lives? What had motivated him to engage in such extreme behavior? Above all, where was he right now? Detective Ramirez was resolved to get responses, searching Alexei's digital footprint and interviewing everyone who had come into touch with him. He set off a manhunt. Though Ramirez was relentless, the search turned up a number of dead ends. Alexei was out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the ideal moment to strike once more, he knew. Leona couldn't get rid of the sensation that they were lacking something absolutely vital. As the research got more intense, though the insects had told their tale, there still had to be discovered a human component. Alexei had gone over the brink for what? The answers were buried in the past, just waiting to be discovered by those courageous enough to face their inner demons. The scene was set for a dramatic confrontation that would expose the actual nature of a broken family ripped apart by lies and secrets, so challenging the boundaries of justice. Detective Ramirez was clearly reading over the case files in the investigation room, tense. Though everything pointed to Alexei Moretti, something did not quite fit. Ramirez sensed that there was more to this tale, a darker, deeper motivation still to surface. Leona kept analyzing in the lab, carefully going over every insect and piece of tissue taken from the bodies. She understood the flaws did not lie. They would expose the truth about the length of the dead bodies and maybe offer more hints regarding their original place of death. Her results verified that the bodies had been relocated, but the precise murder site remained unknown. Ramirez phoned eminent criminal psychologist Dr. Helena Novak to create Alexei's profile. Helena was the ideal team member because of her reputation for peering into criminal minds. She started by going over Alexei's background, pointing out his unhappy upbringing, erratic relationship with his parents, and psychological effects of being caught in the middle of their acrimony. Helena asked teachers, friends, and anyone else who had lately interacted with Alexei questions. She found a pattern of rising behavior, fights at school, run-ins with the law for minor offenses, and progressively wild behavior at home. But Helena found most striking Alexei's ingrained hostility toward his mother and her new husband. Driven by emotions of abandonment and betrayal, this bitterness had been boiling for years. One especially instructive interview was with Luka Ivanov, Alexei's former closest friend. Alexei was a brilliant but troubled person, Luka said, prone to severe mood swings and dark dreams. Luka claims that Alexei talked of feeling like an outsider in his own family quite a bit, particularly after Marie married Carl. Not only in his mother's life, but also in their house, Alexei sensed Carl had replaced him. Understanding his motives seemed to depend on this festering bitterness. A breakthrough occurred in the course of the inquiry when Alexei's old room turned up a secret diary. Disturbing notes in the diary revealed his mounting contempt of his mother and Carl. Particularly one entry caught my attention. From me, they have taken everything. To them, I am simply a mistake they wish they could fix. I will still show them, though. I will show them they cannot simply toss me like garbage. They pay for what they have done. Written just days before Marie and Carl were killed, this horrific entry offered a window into Alexei's tormented mind. Helena came to the conclusion that Alexei's acts were motivated by a twisted need to recover his sense of power and control, and a great desire for retribution. Ramirez understood they had to locate Alexei and hear his side of the story, even with the growing proof. The manhunt got more intense as leads came from all around the nation. While Alexei had kept one step ahead, the net was closing in. Unbelievably, a tip arrived from a far-off farming community, several hundred miles away. Under a false name, a young man exactly like Alexei had been observed working odd jobs. Seeking to at last capture their suspect, Ramirez and his colleagues hurried to the site. Alexei was living in a dilapidated cabin on the edge of the village when they got there. He was arrested without incident, a shell of the angry young man the diary and interviews described. Alexei first resisted the questioning, but he started to break under the deft interrogation of Detective Ramirez and Dr. Novak. Alexei came clean about the murders, detailing in horrifying detail how he had lured his mother and stepfather to the basement under the pretense of a need to talk. Once there, he attacked them with a wrench, his pent-up frustration and years of wrath exploding in a terrible fury. Then he shifted their bodies to the basement, trying to give himself time to vanish. But Alexei's lack of regret really troubled Ramirez and Novak. He talked of the murders as though they were a required deed, a tool for a goal. Killing Marie and Carl, he felt he was taking back his position in the world and establishing his authority over those who had offended him. Alexei's custody meant that the case appeared to be close-ended. For Leona and Detective Ramirez, though, there remained one last piece of the jigsaw to find. They had to know whether there were any signals they had missed that might have stopped Alexei from committing such a horrible deed and what had really motivated her to do. Deeper exploration of Alexei's past revealed a web of secrets and lies, transcending a straightforward family conflict. Marie and Carl had their own sinister histories, full of dishonesty and treachery. The reality about their relationship with Alexei was more complicated than anyone had thought, exposing a family split by secrets that had at last burst in violence. The media frenzy that followed would be a dramatic unfolding of a family's darkest secrets exposed for the world to view. And as the last chapters of this sad tale unfolded in the courtroom, the actual cost of those secrets would become clear, forcing everyone engaged to consider the consequences. With its mix of family drama, psychological intrigue, and brutal violence, Alexei Moretti's trial became a media sensation, capturing public obsession. Reporters crowded courtrooms, and every minute of the proceedings was televised and dissected on news programs. Alexei was presented by the prosecution as a cold-blooded killer, motivated by hate and a need for retribution. The prosecution put a strong case before us as the trial got underway. They went over the evidence gathered from the crime scene, including fingerprints matching Alexei to the scene, the wrench used as the murder weapon, and the damning notes from his journal. Witnesses reported Alexei's erratic actions and growing threats directed against his mother and stepfather. It looked to be an open and shut matter. Especially vital was Leona Habib's testimony. She confirmed that the bodies had been relocated post-mortem and offered a thorough chronology based on the forensic entomology data, elucidating how the life cycles of the insects had helped ascertain the time of death. Her scientific investigation gave the prosecution's case more legitimacy, so challenging the defense's ability to contradict the evidence. Under the seasoned lawyer, Martina Kovac, the defense team aimed to present Alexei in another light, though. They maintained he was pushed to the brink by his mother and stepfather, and suffered extreme emotional and psychological abuse. Martina called Dr. Helena Novak to the stand, whose psychological profile of Alexei revealed a young man severely damaged by years of neglect and control. Helena gave a really strong testimony. She said Alexei had been caught in a poisonous family environment, felt let down by his father, and resentful of his mother's second marriage. Helena claims that years of psychological torture combined with Marie and Carl's treatment of Alexei culminated in his violent outburst. She underlined the notes in his diary as cries for help from a young man at his breaking point, not as proof of premeditation. When the defense offered fresh information on Marie and Carl's past, the trial veered dramatically. Martina said Marie had participated in several high-stakes legal disputes, some of which had led to threats directed against her life. Carl, on the other hand, had a past of dubious business practices that had brought him many rivals. This fresh data implied that Alexei might not have been the only one driven to hurt them. More study on Marie and Carl's life revealed a complex web of lies and treachery. Marie had been involved in a divisive divorce from Alexei's father, Dmitry Moretti, which had left severe emotional scars on all those engaged. Marie had apparently controlled the custody dispute in order to alienate Dmitry from Alexei, so encouraging a sense of abandonment and bitterness in her son. Further concerning were Carl's dubious commercial activities. He had participated in multiple frauds, and rumors of threats directed against him by unhappy business partners abound. These disclosures challenged the story of the prosecution by implying that there might have been other people desiring Marie and Carl dead. The defense added the possibility of a third party participating in the murders as the trial went on. Originally written off as a random burglary, Martina offered proof of a break-in at the estate a few days before the murders. Forensic investigation, however, revealed that the break-in had been created, probably to deflect suspicion directed toward the actual killer. This fresh viewpoint begged important issues. Could someone have framed Alexei for the murders using his volatile condition? Was another party involved that planned the murders to pay off past grievances? The defense's case started to sow questions in the jurors' brains, so complicating what had appeared to be a clear case. Emphasizing Alexei's thorough confession and the overwhelming physical evidence connecting him to the crime, the prosecution rebounded. They maintained that the fresh data on Marie and Carl's past was useless, meant to deflect attention from Alexei's having the means and the intention to carry out the murders. They insisted that the forensic data confirmed his confession, so establishing his guilt. The jury had to consider the contradicting stories as the trial came to an end. One could picture Alexei as a cold-blooded killer, motivated by years of hate and a need for retribution. On the other hand, he was shown as a victim of psychological torture driven to carry out an unimaginable deed during a flash of craziness. The jury deliberated intensely and for a long period. Public opinion was sharply split, and the media spun with conjecture. While some saw Alexei as a monster, deserving of the toughest penalty, others related to him, seeing him as a sad person driven to the brink by his circumstances. Ultimately, acknowledging the mitigating circumstances put forward by the defense, the jury decided on a guilty verdict on double homicide, but advised leniency in sentence. The public reacted with both indignation and relief when Alexei was sentenced to life in prison with parole possibilities. The trial was over, but years to come, the scars from the murders and the following disclosures would linger. While Detective Ramirez and Leona Habib continued on to fresh investigations, the memories of this one stayed with them, a terrible reminder of the complexity of human nature and the sinister secrets that might lie buried inside families. Years went by, and the Moretti-Gustafsson murders disappeared from the news. But for those engaged, the fallout persisted in their daily lives. Now, an inmate, Alexei Moretti underwent intensive psychological treatment in an attempt to reconcile his acts and the circumstances that had led him down such a terrible road. Detective Lucas Ramirez was unable to get rid of his impression that some questions remained. Haunted by the loose ends and the likelihood that someone else might have been involved, he routinely went over the case files. Though he had spent his life seeking justice, this case stayed a thorn in his side, a continual reminder that not all riddles could be cleanly answered. Leona Habib went back to work. Her reputation as a top forensic entomologist was reinforced by her involvement in the Moretti-Gustafsson case. She too, though, was tormented by the memory of those dead bodies and their sad backstory. She committed herself to developing her field, hoping that the knowledge and methods she had developed would help in next cases. In a paper on the psychological elements of the case, Dr. Helena Novak examined how family abuse and neglect affect young brains. Her work started significant discussions on mental health and the necessity of improved support structures for young people who are at danger. Driven by a goal to stop next tragedies, she kept working with difficult people. Having argued for Alexei's sentence to be reduced, Martina Kovac developed into a sought-after defense attorney. Driven by a conviction in the need of knowing the human stories behind the crimes, she accepted cases others judged unworkable. Though her work frequently exposed her to the worst sides of human nature, she stayed firmly committed to justice. Regarding the general people, the case turned into a warning story on the perils of untreated psychological wounds and latent resentment. Talks on mental health and the value of family support acquired momentum and resulted in more money for support initiatives and psychological treatments. Though sad, Alexei's narrative raised more awareness of the complexity of human behavior and the need of compassion and understanding against hardship. It reminded me that behind every crime is a narrative usually involving suffering, loss, and a great need for help. Once a symbol of success and family, the Moretti-Gustafsson mansion remained deserted, a silent monument to the catastrophe that had passed within its walls. It evolved over time into a site of local legend, a place where the past lingered, reminding everyone of the frailty of human relationships and the terrible power of secrets. Ultimately, the case permanently changed the lives and professions of every person engaged, so impacting them. It was a tale of loss and atonement, of justice sought and, in some respects, denied. And as the years passed, it stayed a moving reminder of the sinister shadows that might lie beneath the surface of an apparently ideal family.